For privacy reasons, names and places have been changed. This story is inspired by true events.
On Wednesday, November 14, 1990, 28-year-old marketing executive Catherine Ann Sullivan vanished without a trace from Chicago's Union Station while preparing to board the Lake Shore Limited train back to Boston. The successful businesswoman with auburn hair had just concluded a triumphant 3-day business trip that secured a major client, but she never made it to her platform despite being seen in the station's Great Hall just minutes before departure. Despite extensive investigations involving multiple agencies and hundreds of tips, no trace of Catherine was ever found. 5 years later, maintenance worker Roberto Martinez's routine inspection of the drainage systems beneath the platforms would uncover evidence that finally revealed the horrifying truth about her disappearance. Wednesday, November 14, 1990, began with a biting November wind sweeping across Chicago's Union Station, carrying the promise of winter and the bustling energy of one of America's busiest transportation hubs. Among the thousands of travelers moving through the massive terminal that morning was 28-year-old Catherine Ann Sullivan, a marketing executive from Boston who was concluding a successful 3-day business trip to the Windy City. Catherine stood 5 feet 5 inches tall with auburn hair that she wore in a professional bob, and green eyes that reflected both intelligence and determination. She had graduated from Boston University with a degree in business administration and had quickly established herself as one of the rising stars at Morrison & Associates, a prestigious marketing firm that specialized in campaigns for Fortune 500 companies. Chapter 1. The Journey Home. The Sullivan family had deep roots in Boston, where Catherine had grown up in a close-knit Irish Catholic household in the Dorchester neighborhood. Her father, Patrick Sullivan, was a detective with the Boston Police Department, while her mother, Mary, worked as a nurse at Massachusetts General Hospital. Catherine's younger sister, Jennifer, was completing her final year of law school at Suffolk University. Catherine's business trip to Chicago had been a significant professional opportunity. She had been tasked with presenting a comprehensive marketing proposal to Midwest Industries, a manufacturing conglomerate that represented potentially the largest client in her firm's history. The successful completion of this presentation could have established Catherine as a senior partner track candidate at Morrison & Associates. The meetings had exceeded Catherine's expectations. Over 3 days, she had delivered presentations to the Midwest Industries executive team, negotiated contract terms, and developed relationships with key decision-makers. The preliminary agreement reached on Tuesday afternoon represented a $2.3 million contract that would significantly boost both the firm's revenue and Catherine's career prospects. Catherine had planned to celebrate her success with a nice dinner on Tuesday evening before catching the Lake Shore Limited train back to Boston on Wednesday morning. The Lake Shore Limited was Amtrak's premier service between Chicago and Boston, offering comfortable accommodations and reliable service for the 22-hour journey across the Midwest and Northeast. Her reservation was for the 9:30 a.m. departure from Union Station, with an expected arrival in Boston's South Station at 8:15 p.m. on Thursday evening. Catherine had traveled this route numerous times during her career and was familiar with the train's schedule and amenities. She preferred train travel to flying for longer trips, finding it more relaxing and conducive to working during the journey. Catherine had packed light for the 3-day trip, bringing only a medium-sized navy blue suitcase and a leather briefcase containing her presentation materials and laptop computer. The suitcase contained her professional wardrobe for the meetings, along with personal items and a few souvenirs she had purchased for her family. On Wednesday morning, Catherine checked out of the Palmer House Hotel at 8:15 a.m. and took a taxi to Union Station. The ride through downtown Chicago took approximately 15 minutes, giving her plenty of time to check in for her train and grab coffee before departure. She had called her office from the hotel to report on the successful meetings and had promised to provide a detailed briefing upon her return to Boston. Union Station, completed in 1925, was an architectural marvel that served as a major transportation hub for the Midwest. The station's Great Hall featured soaring ceilings, marble columns, and classical design elements that reflected the grandeur of America's golden age of rail travel. Despite its beauty, the station was also a complex, bustling environment where thousands of people passed through daily. Catherine arrived at Union Station at 8:45 a.m., giving her 45 minutes before her train's scheduled departure. She proceeded to the ticket counter to confirm her reservation and check her suitcase, following standard procedures for long-distance Amtrak travel. The ticket agent, Maria Rodriguez, later recalled serving Catherine and noted that she had seemed cheerful and excited about returning home. After checking her suitcase, Catherine retained her briefcase and a small carry-on bag containing items she would need during the journey. She purchased a cup of coffee and a newspaper from a vendor in the Great Hall and found a seat in the departure area to wait for her train's boarding announcement. The departure area for the Lake Shore Limited was located on the station's lower level, accessed through a series of escalators and corridors that connected the Great Hall to the train platforms. The area was typically crowded with passengers preparing for various departures, creating a bustling environment with constant movement and activity. At approximately 9:15 a.m., the boarding announcement for the Lake Shore Limited was made over the station's public address system. Catherine gathered her belongings and joined the queue of passengers moving toward track 14, where the train was positioned for boarding. She was observed by several witnesses walking toward the platform area, briefcase in hand, appearing confident and unhurried. However, Catherine and Sullivan never boarded the Lake Shore Limited. When the train departed Union Station at 9:45 a.m., 15 minutes behind schedule due to mechanical issues, Catherine was not among the passengers. Her reserved seat remained empty throughout the journey to Boston, and her checked suitcase continued to the final destination without its owner. The first indication that something was wrong came when Catherine failed to arrive at Boston's South Station on Thursday evening. Her sister Jennifer had arranged to meet Catherine's train and drive her home, but when the Lake Shore Limited arrived without Catherine aboard, Jennifer initially assumed that her sister had missed the connection or had decided to extend her stay in Chicago. However, when Jennifer called Catherine's hotel in Chicago, she learned that Catherine had checked out on Wednesday morning as planned. The hotel staff confirmed that Catherine had left with her luggage and had taken a taxi to Union Station. When Jennifer called Morrison and Associates, she discovered that Catherine had not contacted the office to report any changes to her travel plans. Jennifer contacted the Chicago Police Department at 10:30 p.m. on Thursday, November 15th, to report her sister missing. The initial response was measured, as law enforcement agencies were accustomed to dealing with missed travel connections and communication problems that could easily explain a person's temporary absence. However, the circumstances of Catherine's disappearance raised immediate concerns. She was a responsible professional with strong family ties who would not have failed to communicate any changes to her travel plans. Additionally, her successful business meetings and career prospects provided no obvious motivation for her to voluntarily disappear. The investigation into Catherine Sullivan's disappearance was about to begin, but already the case was presenting law enforcement with a complex puzzle. How could a responsible businesswoman vanish from one of Chicago's busiest public places in broad daylight? The answers would remain hidden beneath Union Station's platforms for 5 years, waiting for a routine maintenance inspection to bring them to light. Chapter 2. Tracking the Last Hours. Friday, November 16, 1990, marked the beginning of an intensive investigation led by Detective Robert Chen of the Chicago Police Department's Missing Persons Unit. Detective Chen had 15 years of experience investigating disappearances in one of America's largest cities and immediately recognized that Catherine Sullivan's case presented several concerning factors that distinguished it from typical missing person reports. The investigation began with a comprehensive reconstruction of Catherine's movements from the time she left the Palmer House Hotel until her planned departure on the Lake Shore Limited. Detective Chen worked closely with Amtrak security personnel and Union Station staff to identify witnesses and gather physical evidence from Catherine's last known location. The ticket agent, Maria Rodriguez, provided detailed information about her interaction with Catherine at approximately 8:50 a.m. on November 14th. Rodriguez remembered Catherine distinctly because she had been professionally dressed and had seemed excited about returning home to Boston. Catherine had confirmed her reservation and had checked her navy blue suitcase without any apparent problems or concerns. The baggage handling records confirmed that Catherine's suitcase had been properly processed and loaded onto the Lake Shore Limited. The suitcase had traveled to Boston's South Station, where it remained in Amtrak's unclaimed baggage facility pending Catherine's recovery. Detective Chen arranged to examine the suitcase's contents as potential evidence. The examination of Catherine's suitcase revealed a carefully packed collection of professional clothing, personal items, and souvenirs that were consistent with a successful business trip. However, investigators found no indication of personal distress, unusual purchases, or items that might suggest Catherine had been planning to disappear voluntarily. The investigation expanded to include interviews with all Union Station personnel who had been working during the relevant time period. This process involved speaking with ticket agents, security guards, maintenance workers, vendors, and cleaning staff who might have observed Catherine or noticed unusual activities in the station. One significant witness was coffee vendor James Morrison, who remembered selling coffee to a woman matching Catherine's description around 9 a.m. Morrison recalled that the woman had seemed normal and relaxed, purchasing coffee and engaging in brief small talk about the weather and her upcoming train journey. However, Morrison's cart was located in the Great Hall, approximately 200 yards from the platform area where Catherine would have boarded her train. This meant that Catherine had been seen in the station after checking her baggage but had disappeared somewhere between the Great Hall and Track 14. The investigation team mapped Catherine's most likely route from the coffee vendor to her departure platform, identifying key locations where she might have encountered problems or been approached by someone with malicious intent. The route included several areas that were less heavily monitored and provided opportunities for criminal activity. Union Station's security system in 1990 consisted of a limited number of surveillance cameras that covered main areas but did not provide comprehensive monitoring of all corridors and platform areas. Detective Chen reviewed all available footage from November 14th but found no clear images of Catherine after she purchased coffee in the Great Hall. The investigation revealed that Union Station had been experiencing problems with transients and petty criminals who took advantage of the busy environment to target travelers. Station security had been dealing with pickpockets, con artists, and individuals who approached passengers with various schemes designed to separate them from their money or belongings. However, Catherine's disappearance seemed more serious than typical crimes targeting travelers. Her briefcase and carry-on bag were missing along with her, suggesting that either she had left the station voluntarily or she had been taken by someone who wanted to avoid leaving evidence behind. Detective Chen expanded the investigation to include examination of Catherine's professional and personal life for any factors that might have motivated her disappearance or made her a target for criminal activity. This analysis included review of her work at Morrison & Associates, her recent business activities, and her personal relationships. The investigation into Catherine's professional life revealed that she had been working on several high-profile marketing campaigns that involved sensitive corporate information and competitive intelligence. The Midwest Industries contract, in particular, represented a significant business opportunity that could have attracted attention from competitors or individuals with criminal intent. However, interviews with Catherine's colleagues and clients revealed no obvious threats or conflicts that might have endangered her safety. Morrison & Associates was a respected firm with no history of involvement in controversial or dangerous business activities. Catherine's personal life was also examined thoroughly, revealing a stable individual with strong family connections and no apparent problems that might have motivated her to disappear voluntarily. She had no history of mental health issues, substance abuse, or financial difficulties that could have contributed to erratic behavior. The investigation included extensive interviews with Catherine's family members, friends, and romantic interests. Catherine had been dating David Walsh, a Boston attorney, for approximately 8 months, and their relationship appeared stable and serious. Walsh had been in Boston during Catherine's Chicago trip and had a solid alibi for the time period when she disappeared. As the investigation entered its second week, Detective Chen had developed a comprehensive timeline of Catherine's activities but had not identified any definitive leads regarding her disappearance. The case was beginning to attract media attention, with local television stations and newspapers reporting on the mysterious vanishing of the Boston businesswoman. The media coverage generated dozens of tips from the public, including reports of women resembling Catherine being seen at various locations throughout the Chicago area. However, most of these reports proved to be cases of mistaken identity or were not credible upon follow-up investigation. One potentially significant lead came from a taxi driver who reported dropping off a woman matching Catherine's description at a location near Lake Michigan on the morning of November 14th. However, the driver could not provide a definitive identification, and investigators could not verify that the passenger had actually been Catherine. Another lead came from a hotel clerk who reported that a woman resembling Catherine had checked in under a false name at a downtown Chicago hotel. However, the follow-up investigation revealed that the woman was an out-of-town visitor with no connection to Catherine's case. The investigation also included a comprehensive search of areas around Union Station where Catherine might have been taken or where evidence might have been disposed of. This search covered parking areas, nearby buildings, construction sites, and the Chicago River waterfront. The search efforts involved multiple law enforcement agencies, including the Chicago Police Department, Illinois State Police, and federal authorities who had jurisdiction over crimes involving interstate transportation. However, despite extensive efforts, no physical evidence related to Catherine's disappearance was discovered. As November 1990 ended, the investigation had generated extensive documentation but no definitive answers about Catherine's fate. The case had been classified as a suspected abduction based on the circumstances and Catherine's character, but investigators had not identified specific suspects or developed clear theories about what had happened to her. The Sullivan family had traveled to Chicago to participate in the search efforts and to coordinate with law enforcement. Patrick Sullivan, Catherine's father and a Boston police detective, used his law enforcement connections to ensure that the investigation received appropriate resources and attention. However, the lack of physical evidence and reliable witnesses made the case extremely challenging for investigators. Catherine had seemingly vanished from one of Chicago's busiest locations without leaving any trace of her presence or any indication of what had happened to her. The investigation was about to enter a long-term phase with periodic reviews and follow-ups but limited daily activity. The answers that the Sullivan family desperately sought were hidden just beneath their feet, in the infrastructure of Union Station where Catherine had last been seen alive. Chapter 3. Expanding the Investigation. As winter settled over Chicago in December 1990, the investigation into Catherine Sullivan's disappearance had evolved into a complex multi-jurisdictional effort involving local, state, and federal law enforcement agencies. Detective Chen had been assigned to work the case full-time, coordinating with the FBI and Amtrak's own security division to explore every possible lead and theory. The FBI's involvement brought specialized resources and analytical capabilities that were not available to local law enforcement. Special Agent Patricia Moore, who had extensive experience with interstate crimes and missing persons cases, was assigned to coordinate the federal aspects of the investigation. The FBI's initial analysis focused on the possibility that Catherine's disappearance might be connected to her professional activities or the sensitive business information she had been handling. The Midwest Industries contract represented a significant competitive advantage, and Agent Moore theorized that industrial espionage or corporate sabotage might have been involved. However, the investigation into potential corporate connections revealed no evidence of criminal activity or threats related to Catherine's business dealings. Midwest Industries was a legitimate manufacturing company with no history of involvement in illegal activities, and Catherine's competitors appeared to be conducting normal business operations. The investigation expanded to include analysis of similar disappearances from major transportation hubs throughout the United States. The FBI's database search identified several cases involving women who had vanished from train stations, airports, and bus terminals under circumstances that shared common elements with Catherine's case. The pattern analysis revealed that young professional women traveling alone were particularly vulnerable to predatory individuals who frequented transportation facilities. These predators often posed as legitimate travelers or transportation employees to approach victims without arousing suspicion. One case that drew particular attention was the disappearance of 26-year-old Linda Martinez from New York's Penn Station in September 1989. Linda had been traveling from New York to Philadelphia on business when she had vanished after checking her luggage but before boarding her train. Despite extensive investigation, Linda had never been found, and no arrests had been made in her case. The similarities between Catherine's and Linda's cases prompted a joint investigation to determine if the same perpetrator might be responsible for both disappearances. However, the analysis revealed significant differences in methodology and circumstances that suggested the cases were not connected. The Chicago investigation also focused on individuals who had access to Union Station and who might have had opportunities to approach Catherine without attracting attention. This analysis included background checks on all station employees, contractors, and frequent visitors who might have been present on November 14th. One individual who drew investigative attention was 34-year-old Thomas Walker, a freelance maintenance worker who had been performing contract work at Union Station during the week of Catherine's disappearance. Walker had a criminal history that included arrests for theft and assault, though he had no previous convictions for crimes against women. The investigation into Walker revealed that he had been working in areas of Union Station that were not accessible to regular passengers, including maintenance tunnels and utility areas beneath the platforms. His work schedule would have provided him with detailed knowledge of the station's layout and security procedures. Walker was interviewed extensively about his activities on November 14th and his knowledge of the station's operations. He claimed to have been working in mechanical areas throughout the morning and provided work orders and supervisor statements to support his account. However, Walker's supervisor could not definitively account for his whereabouts during the critical time period when Catherine disappeared. The nature of his maintenance work often required him to move between different areas of the station without constant supervision. Walker consented to a polygraph examination, which produced inconclusive results. While he showed some physiological responses that could indicate deception, the results were not definitive enough to support criminal charges or to eliminate him as a suspect. The investigation also revealed that Union Station's infrastructure included numerous areas that were not regularly monitored or accessible to the general public. The building's basement levels contained utility tunnels, storage areas, and abandoned spaces that could potentially conceal evidence or provide hiding places. Detective Chen organized systematic searches of these areas, working with station maintenance personnel to access locations that were normally secured or restricted. The searches were complicated by the building's age and complexity, as many areas had been modified or abandoned over the decades since the station's construction. The searches revealed various items that had been lost or discarded over the years, including personal belongings, clothing, and other materials. However, none of the discoveries appeared to be related to Catherine's disappearance or provided information about what had happened to her. Meanwhile, the Sullivan family had established a reward fund offering $50,000 for information leading to Catherine's safe return or the arrest of those responsible for her disappearance. The reward was announced during a press conference in January 1991, which was covered by national media outlets and generated hundreds of new tips. The press conference featured emotional appeals from Catherine's parents and sister, along with updates from Detective Chen and Agent Moore about the investigation's progress. The coverage renewed public interest in the case and resulted in additional volunteers joining the search efforts. However, most of the tips generated by the media coverage proved to be false leads or cases of mistaken identity. The investigation team had to carefully evaluate each report, often requiring follow-up investigations in distant locations that consumed significant resources. One promising lead came from a truck driver who reported seeing a woman matching Catherine's description at a rest stop in Indiana on November 15th. The woman had appeared distressed and had been with a man who seemed to be controlling her movements. However, investigators were unable to verify this sighting or identify the individuals involved. Another significant lead came from a former Union Station employee who reported that he had observed suspicious activity in the station's basement areas during the week of Catherine's disappearance. The employee, who had been terminated for unrelated reasons, claimed that he had seen someone moving large packages through utility tunnels during unusual hours. However, the follow-up investigation revealed that the former employee had credibility issues and might have been motivated by resentment against his former employer. His claims could not be verified through other witnesses or physical evidence. As 1991 progressed, the investigation had generated extensive information but no definitive answers about Catherine's fate. The case had been featured on national television programs, including America's Most Wanted and Unsolved Mysteries, generating additional tips but no breakthroughs. The television coverage revealed that Catherine's case was part of a broader pattern of women disappearing from transportation facilities throughout the United States. However, investigators were unable to establish definitive connections between these cases or identify a single perpetrator responsible for multiple crimes. The investigation had also influenced changes in security and safety procedures at Union Station and other major transportation facilities. Enhanced lighting, improved surveillance systems, and increased security patrols had been implemented to reduce the vulnerability of travelers to criminal activity. As the investigation entered its second year, the active search efforts were being scaled back due to the lack of new leads and the demands of other cases. However, the Chicago Police Department maintained the case as a high priority and continued to pursue any new information that emerged. The answers that investigators were seeking lay hidden in the infrastructure of Union Station itself, in spaces that had been searched but where evidence remained concealed. The truth about Catherine Sullivan's fate was waiting beneath the platforms where thousands of travelers passed daily, unaware of the secret that lay just feet beneath their steps. Chapter 4. The Case Grows Cold. By the autumn of 1992, 2 years after Catherine Sullivan's disappearance, the investigation had officially transitioned to cold case status. Detective Chen had been reassigned to active cases but continued to review Catherine's file quarterly and pursue any new leads that emerged from ongoing tip lines and periodic media coverage. The Chicago Police Department had generated over 1,200 pages of investigative reports and had interviewed more than 300 individuals in connection with Catherine's case. Despite the extensive effort, no arrests had been made and no definitive evidence had been discovered regarding her fate. The Sullivan family had struggled through 2 years of uncertainty, dealing with the emotional toll of not knowing whether Catherine was alive or dead. Patrick Sullivan had taken early retirement from the Boston Police Department to focus on advocacy work for missing persons families, while Mary Sullivan had reduced her nursing duties to manageable part-time status. Jennifer Sullivan had completed law school and had established a practice specializing in missing persons cases and victim rights advocacy. She had used her legal expertise to push for legislative changes that would improve law enforcement coordination and resource allocation for missing persons investigations. The family had maintained the reward fund and had continued to generate periodic media coverage for Catherine's case. However, public attention had gradually diminished as time passed without new developments, and the flow of tips and leads had slowed significantly. Union Station had implemented enhanced security measures in response to Catherine's disappearance and public pressure for improved passenger safety. The improvements included additional surveillance cameras, increased security patrols, and better lighting in previously dark or isolated areas. However, the station's infrastructure remained largely unchanged, with many areas still inaccessible to regular security patrols or maintenance inspections. The building's age and complexity continued to present challenges for comprehensive monitoring and security coverage. The investigation had influenced changes in procedures for handling missing persons cases at major transportation facilities throughout the United States. Amtrak and other transportation companies had developed improved protocols for reporting and responding to passenger disappearances. In 1993, 3 years after Catherine's disappearance, the case received renewed attention when it was featured in a documentary about missing persons cases at transportation hubs. The program included interviews with the Sullivan family, Detective Chen, and transportation security experts discussing the vulnerabilities that existed at major travel facilities. The documentary generated approximately 100 new tips from viewers, though most proved to be unrelated to Catherine's case. However, the attention did result in additional funding for cold case investigations and improved coordination between law enforcement agencies working on similar cases. One potentially significant development occurred in 1994 when construction workers renovating a section of Union Station discovered human remains in a sealed utility area that had been inaccessible for decades. The discovery generated significant media coverage and raised hopes that Catherine's case might finally be resolved. However, forensic analysis revealed that the remains belonged to a different individual entirely and were much older than Catherine's disappearance. The remains were eventually identified through dental records as those of a transient who had died in the 1970s, though the circumstances of his death remained unclear. The false hope generated by the discovery was particularly difficult for the Sullivan family, who had traveled to Chicago and waited anxiously for forensic results. The experience reinforced their understanding that the investigation might never provide definitive answers about Catherine's fate. As 1995 began, 5 years after Catherine's disappearance, her case had become part of Chicago's collection of unsolved mysteries. The investigation files were stored in the cold case unit, where they were reviewed periodically but were no longer the subject of active investigation. Detective Chen had been promoted to sergeant and was supervising other detectives, but he continued to maintain personal involvement in Catherine's case. The investigation had become a defining challenge of his career, and he often thought about the case during quiet moments. The Chicago Police Department had learned valuable lessons from Catherine's case about the challenges of investigating disappearances from major transportation facilities. The investigation had demonstrated the importance of immediate response, comprehensive evidence collection, and coordinated multi-jurisdictional efforts. Union Station continued to serve hundreds of thousands of passengers annually, with most travelers unaware of the mystery that remained unsolved within its walls. The station's daily operations proceeded normally, with trains arriving and departing according to schedule and passengers moving through the facility without incident. However, beneath the busy platforms and public areas, the station's infrastructure contained secrets that had remained hidden for 5 years. The truth about Catherine Sullivan's fate lay waiting in spaces that were rarely accessed and seldom inspected, preserved by the building's complex design and overlooked by routine maintenance activities. The Union Station maintenance staff included workers who had been employed since before Catherine's disappearance and who remembered the intensive investigation that had followed her vanishing. However, their daily routines rarely took them to the most remote areas of the building's basement levels. Among the maintenance staff was 45-year-old Roberto Martinez, who had worked as a train conductor for Amtrak for over 20 years before transferring to Union Station maintenance duties in 1993. Martinez was responsible for inspecting and maintaining areas of the station that were related to train operations but were not accessible to passengers. Martinez's work included periodic inspections of utility areas, drainage systems, and structural components that supported the station's platforms and track areas. These inspections were typically conducted annually or when specific problems were reported, requiring Martinez to access areas that were rarely visited by other personnel. The inspection schedule for 1995 included a comprehensive review of drainage systems and utility areas that had been deferred during previous years due to budget constraints and other priorities. Martinez had been assigned to conduct these inspections systematically, working through areas that had not been thoroughly examined for several years. As Martinez prepared for his inspection duties in the spring of 1995, he was unaware that he was about to make a discovery that would finally provide answers to one of Chicago's most puzzling missing persons cases. The truth about Catherine Sullivan's fate was waiting in a place where no one had thought to look, hidden beneath the platforms where she had last been seen alive. Chapter 5. The Discovery Beneath the Platform. May 22, 1995. 4 years and 6 months after Catherine Sullivan vanished from Union Station, Amtrak maintenance worker Roberto Martinez was conducting a routine inspection of the drainage systems beneath Track 14, the same platform where Catherine had been scheduled to board the Lake Shore Limited on that November morning in 1990. Martinez had been assigned to inspect the station's basement infrastructure as part of a comprehensive maintenance program that had been deferred for several years due to budget constraints. The work required accessing utility areas, drainage tunnels, and structural supports that were normally sealed off from public access and rarely visited even by maintenance personnel. The area beneath Track 14 was particularly complex, featuring a network of drainage pipes, electrical conduits, and structural supports that had been installed during various renovation projects over the station's 70-year history. The space was cramped, poorly lit, and accessible only through maintenance hatches located in restricted areas of the station. Martinez had been working in the basement areas for 3 weeks, methodically inspecting drainage systems and documenting maintenance needs for future work orders. The job was tedious and physically demanding, requiring him to crawl through narrow spaces and work in uncomfortable positions while examining infrastructure components. On the morning of May 22, Martinez was inspecting a drainage area approximately 20 feet beneath the center of Track 14's platform. The space was accessed through a maintenance hatch that required special tools to open and was marked with warnings about unauthorized entry. As Martinez examined the drainage pipes in this area, his flashlight illuminated something unusual lodged against the wall in a corner where debris typically accumulated. The object appeared to be a piece of luggage that had somehow ended up in the drainage area, though Martinez could not immediately understand how it had gotten there. Martinez carefully extracted the object, which proved to be a navy blue suitcase that was water-damaged and covered with the grime and sediment that had accumulated in the drainage area over several years. The suitcase was partially compressed from the weight of debris that had collected around it, but it remained structurally intact. The suitcase bore an Amtrak baggage tag that was still partially legible despite the water damage and age. Martinez was able to make out portions of the tag information, including what appeared to be a destination code for Boston and a date that seemed to correspond to November 1990. Martinez immediately recognized the potential significance of his discovery, particularly given the date on the baggage tag and the location where the suitcase had been found. He had been employed at Union Station during the investigation into Catherine Sullivan's disappearance and remembered the intensive search efforts that had followed her vanishing. Rather than opening the suitcase himself, Martinez carefully preserved it and immediately contacted his supervisor, James Morrison, who had also been employed at the station during the original investigation. Morrison recognized the potential connection to the Sullivan case and contacted the Chicago Police Department within minutes of Martinez's call. Detective Sergeant Robert Chen, now supervising the cold case unit but still personally involved in Catherine's case, arrived at Union Station at 2:15 p.m. to examine the discovered suitcase. Chen was accompanied by Evidence Technician Officer Patricia Rodriguez and representatives from Amtrak Security. The initial examination of the suitcase revealed that it matched the description of the luggage that Catherine Sullivan had checked on November 14, 1990. The Amtrak baggage tag, though damaged, contained routing information that was consistent with Catherine's planned journey from Chicago to Boston. More significantly, the suitcase's location beneath track 14 suggested that it had not simply been lost or misplaced during normal baggage handling procedures. The drainage area where it was found was not accessible through routine operations and could only be reached through deliberate action by someone with knowledge of the station's infrastructure. The suitcase was carefully transported to the Chicago Police Department's forensic laboratory for comprehensive examination. The analysis would include fingerprint testing, DNA analysis of any organic materials, and detailed documentation of the contents and their condition after years in the drainage system. The laboratory examination revealed that the suitcase had been deliberately placed in the drainage area rather than accidentally dropped or lost. The positioning and condition of the luggage suggested that it had been hidden intentionally, possibly to conceal evidence of criminal activity. Most importantly, forensic analysis of the suitcase's contents revealed traces of blood that had been preserved despite exposure to moisture and time. DNA testing confirmed that the blood belonged to Catherine Sullivan, providing the first definitive physical evidence of her fate since her disappearance. The discovery prompted an immediate expansion of the search efforts in the basement areas of Union Station. Additional forensic teams were deployed to examine other drainage areas, utility spaces, and structural components that might contain related evidence. The expanded search revealed additional disturbing evidence in a sealed utility room approximately 50 feet from where the suitcase had been found. Hidden behind maintenance equipment, investigators discovered Catherine's briefcase and personal effects, along with physical evidence that confirmed she had been murdered. Most significantly, the search of the utility room revealed human remains that were later identified through dental records as those of Catherine Sullivan. The remains were concealed in an area that had been inaccessible since 1990, explaining why they had not been discovered during the original investigation. The forensic analysis of the crime scene revealed that Catherine had been attacked in the utility room and had died from blunt force trauma to the head. The evidence suggested that she had been lured or forced into the restricted area, where she had been assaulted and killed. The discovery of Catherine's remains and the physical evidence finally provided investigators with the breakthrough they had been seeking for over 4 years. The location of the crime scene and the method used to conceal evidence suggested that the perpetrator had detailed knowledge of Union Station's infrastructure. The investigation focused on individuals who had access to the restricted areas where Catherine's remains and belongings had been hidden. This analysis revealed that only a limited number of people would have possessed the keys, knowledge, and opportunity necessary to commit the crime and conceal the evidence. Thomas Walker, the maintenance worker who had been a person of interest during the original investigation, was arrested on May 25, 1995, and charged with murder in connection with Catherine's death. The arrest was based on additional evidence discovered at the crime scene and Walker's access to the areas where Catherine's remains had been concealed. During questioning, Walker eventually confessed to attacking Catherine after luring her to the basement area under the pretense of helping her with a problem related to her train boarding. He had intended to rob her but had killed her when she resisted and threatened to report him to authorities. Walker's confession revealed that he had used his maintenance access to hide Catherine's body and belongings in areas that he knew were rarely inspected. He had remained employed at Union Station throughout the investigation, participating in search efforts while knowing that evidence was hidden just feet away from where investigators were looking. The case was finally solved after more than 4 years of investigation, providing closure for the Sullivan family while revealing the disturbing truth about Catherine's final moments. Walker was convicted of first-degree murder and sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. The discovery demonstrated the importance of persistence in cold case investigations and the potential for crucial evidence to remain hidden for extended periods in complex urban environments. Catherine's suitcase, concealed in Union Station's infrastructure, had ultimately provided the evidence needed to bring her killer to justice. The Sullivan family finally had the answers they had been seeking, though the knowledge of Catherine's suffering was difficult to accept. Patrick and Mary Sullivan attended Walker's trial and sentencing, stating that while justice had been served, nothing could restore the daughter and future that had been stolen from them. The case became a landmark in transportation security and missing persons investigation, leading to improved procedures for accessing and monitoring infrastructure areas at major transportation facilities. Catherine's legacy lived on through enhanced safety measures that would protect future travelers. Union Station underwent comprehensive security upgrades following the resolution of Catherine's case, including improved access controls, enhanced surveillance systems, and regular inspection protocols for previously neglected areas. The station also established memorial recognition for Catherine and other crime victims. Roberto Martinez was recognized for his crucial role in discovering the evidence that solved the case. His diligent maintenance work and immediate recognition of the suitcase's significance had been essential to finally bringing Catherine's killer to justice and providing closure for her family. The briefcase that Catherine had carried to her final business meeting had contained not only her professional materials but also a detailed calendar that showed her plans for the future. Plans that had been cut short by a random act of violence in a place where she should have been safe. Catherine Sullivan's story became a reminder that danger could lurk in the most unexpected places and that the persistence of investigators and the dedication of workers like Martinez could ultimately ensure that justice would be served, even when the truth remained hidden for years in the darkness beneath the city.